Postcolonial, and Decolonial. We have 5 speakers and 4 engaging interventions. So I will just list the speakers with duly presenting in the order in which they appear if you have the schedule. So starting us off are Florian, Carl, and Federica Stagni. The transformational power in cross-communal anti-colonial struggles, relational potentiality of non-Indigenous involvement in Palestine, and Sápmi. They will be followed by Pushpa Iyer, Decolonizing the Classroom, Lessons for Peace Educators, who will be followed by Eleyan, Sawafta, How Modern Consumer Capitalism Became a New Type of Colonialism in Conflict Zones, Palestinian Crony Capitalism, the Case Study. And lastly, myself, whose title does not fit the other very serious intellectual titles. Amageddon, It's Been in Effect, Public Enemy, Ursula, Guin, and N.K. Jemisin in Conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for coming to listen to our presentation. Today, we are going to present the first draft of a paper that attempts to connect the dots between both our experiences in working alongside projects of cross-communal solidarity. Okay, my name is Federica, and I'm a PhD candidate at Scuola Superiore and a member of the Center for Social Movement Studies. My contribution here is based on several years of experience in joint campaigns in Israel and Palestine. The research I'm doing is particularly concerned with understanding anti-demolition and anti-eviction movements from a social movement studies perspective. The opportunity of coming to the PJSA is linked to a long-term research visit that I will be doing over the next 2 months at Purdue University in Lafayette. Here I will be working with Professor Rachel Hauer with a focus on methods to analyze movement coalitions outcome, which is a subfield social movement science. And I also plan to visit other places in Carolina and USA. So if you have any contacts or you know professors or people that would be interested in similar topics, I would be very happy to hear from your contacts and suggestions.
Hi everyone, so my name is Florian Carl, and I'm a community organizer and journalist and researcher, and also I like to produce music. I have long worked alongside frontline communities, mostly in Europe. For example, as a project coordinator and campaigner in a climate litigation at the highest European court. I was recently awarded a 4-year PhD scholarship at the same department as Federica. My research addresses processes of self-actualization, belonging, and futurity in European movement spaces. I'm focusing on conquest as a primary delineator of cross-communal relationality in the triad of what Tiffany Guin calls Indigenous, European white, and Black communities. And in the next 2 months, I will be spending time at UMass as a visiting researcher and also be in New York. So I'm also really interested for anyone that's curious to link up and any suggestions for whom to get engaged with more.
Okay. Yeah. The presentations follow the structure of the paper. We are working on with the title Relational Potentiality and Transformative Power, Cross-Community Anti-Colonial Struggles in Palestine and Sápmi. Both contexts are deeply scared by colonization, which predetermines most of the cross-communal relationships that take place. This is particularly evident in the prevalence of violence the ongoing abolition of lands, waters, and exploitation of more than human relatives. This manifests in deeply divided position of power and material inequality.
My experience comes both from working alongside Sámi communities and from supporting indigenous groups at international fora like the UN Climate Conference. And I started this work at Lund University during my bachelor 10 years ago. Since then, I've co-published several articles with Sámi, then various collaborative projects, of which you see a couple of pictures also later. And I'm part of Cloudberry Collective, which is a community that strives to nurture and support anti-colonial, decolonial struggles within Europe.
Okay, the first time that I was in Palestine was already 6 years ago as an activist with an Italian NGO. Maybe some of you know Operation Dove. And so they did work mainly in the south of the hills when it comes to Palestine. And since then, I kept going then as a researcher and mostly as a supporter from the Palestinian right to self-determination.
Both of our projects are similar in many ways, and we therefore found ourselves wondering how our different contexts might inform and animate each other, especially when it comes to the question of how non-Indigenous actors can meaningfully participate in anti-colonial struggles. Okay.
Inequalities and power asymmetries are bound up in binary and antagonistic lives of division inherited through dynamics like collective conditioning or intergenerational trauma. On the ground, domination and violence are required to reproduce this context every day. Consequently, joint campaigns or collaborations between indigenous and non-indigenous people are confronted with divisionary issues that tend to reproduce tactics of conquest, for example, by imposing a time and the space of the post we are quoting the movement King. Other attempts embrace difference through a multicultural liberal perspective that we are all well aware of, which consequently stabilizes the settler identity insofar as it seeks reform from within, a within that is both embodied and institutionalized. Here we are quoting Billy Ray Burton.
Through our personal experience in these spaces, we realized there's a need to better understand how people participating in these interactions manage and address power asymmetries. Consequently, we outline 3 different manifestations of these dynamics. First, the equalizing of difference. Second, an institutionalized civil society approach, especially looking at NGOs. And lastly, we look at community organizing that utilizes decolonial practices. And these are preliminary categories.
Okay, for the equalizing of differences in Palestine, we allied the people-to-people groups and initiative. I don't know if you're familiar with, but they were part of the Oslo Accords peace process, and in which Palestinians and Israelis were asked to participate in meetings to discuss, in fact, the peace process, while for Sápmi, we emphasized the Swedish state position manifested in a 2020 report by the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination in the case of a mine on the ancestral lands of Vapsten, Sámi, reindeer, and community. Both cases, even though they are really different if we think about the geography, both cases follow anyway a multicultural and liberal understanding of the conflict. Equal representation is meant to dissolve organizational hierarchy in the resulting cross-communal interaction, mostly on a dialogue level. A symmetrical framing is constructed to give the perception of a bottom-up talks that instead it's not real and it's not there in a level playing field. However, material inequality and different positionalities in terms of power were completely disregarded, and it was the main problem that the colonial line wasn't recognized, and so without this recognition, then we can perform asymmetry, but it's just a performance. And this becomes clear when considering that both processes in Sápmi and Palestine are designed, which is also very important, to exclude those people who are at the core of the conflict for making meaningful contribution. Just to make a very quick example, people to people were in English, and people who participated they couldn't have criminal records.
And so one Palestinian activist told Federica in an interview, you need to be seen as equal, and that's the staging. You need to stage equality, and it doesn't have also to focus on debate around narratives, because we know the limits of those. We know that at maximum, we can be very respectful and agree to disagree.
Yeah, so going back to the meetings, they target specifically the Israeli and the Palestinian middle class, which I think is also very important, which had a different interests in peace, in composition, in comparison to disenfranchised communities like the one in the south of the US that I worked with, who face constant violence from the Israeli Defensive Force, the IDF, and from settlers. In Sápmi, the Swedish state defense opposition, whereby all people are treated the same, and that therefore there is no discrimination against family. However, the European Court of Human Rights clarified that laws that don't discriminate against a certain group in and of themselves are still discriminating if they hurt members of that group more than other people. It's not enough also to be well versed in the language of justice when we continue to disregard injustices that constitute many organizing spaces. So new colonial institutions and the allied industrial complex are quick to create a sense of change. This includes the ignorance about how passing the MIC to a frontline communities can confuse fantasies about the exchange rate between the attention economy and the material economy, as Olufemi Otaiwo made clear in his recent book.
The challenge of nurturing transformative relations has to be critical about how identity politics and means of solidarity are captured through business as usual. You can see this capture happening both on the left and the right, whereas the latter are favored through the conservative inertia of political structures. Without dismantling oppressive hierarchies and transforming the corresponding structures, NGOs tend to do more harm than good in the long run, as one Palestinian activist told Federica.
Many NGOs come only with a good will, but without the professional capacity. But good intention can lead to hell. And I've seen some encounters in which kids come from the encounter saying, I used to hate Arabs and now I know why, or I used to hate Jews and now I know why.
NGOs bring staff who have job descriptions, they have their own agenda and things they hope to get from communities. Consequently, there is a tendency for NGOs to benefit from the initiatives of more radical organizers by recruiting them as a way of to secure access to influence in policy-making circles. Another Sápmi collaborator outlined more issues. If Sápmi would be strategic and utilitarian, it is totally different than an NGO person is being strategic. They have totally different moral grounds for being utilitarian. People often look at it like you're just mitigating, you're kind of mediating interests. We're doing conflict mediation on interests. But Sápmi basic human rights to self-determination are not interests, they are a right.
Okay, following different Israeli and Palestinian activist group in the region of the south of the hills, so I started to realize that the type of activism that was going on there was different, and so I wondered how. And so, and in particular, they managed to do that. What emerged is that Israeli activists, after many failed attempts, because of course they reproduced colonial violence in many other peace groups and in many other peace activities, were able to start at least a more serious reflection on how to join Palestinian activists on the ground and being the junior leader in a way. So, and together in particular with their communities, because I think that what is there that is different from other parts, that it's very community-based. And so that was also something that struck me. And so the answer that emerged is that collaboration were grounded in both practical strategies and also related to shifts in attitude towards cross-communal relationality.
And the collaborator with Sápmi reflected this quite well, saying, we often think that racism is an issue for Black and people of color, so they should have workshops about racism. So the indigenous issues are an issue for the indigenous people. What we miss in all of this is that all of those people are affected and have problems because of us in the majority society. We are the problem. What we need to understand is that decolonizing is changing that relationship. It means that we change ourselves. Do we want to be that oppressor? I don't think so.
So going towards the conclusion that this picture was taken in one of those moments, well, very hard one. And so such movements need to address their internal power dynamics, including material inequality. And I think this is not done enough. Before joining anti-colonial struggles, it is key to understand the cause of the struggle and how it pertains to one's own positionality, history, and future. While resource mobilization theory insists on the role of resources of different genres, we know such as economic, cultural, social, relational, linguistic, the practices we witness here did not deny the source of the resources, and in particular, acknowledged they were linked to a position of privilege.
An Israeli activist told us, for Israelis to go to the West Bank is extremely, extremely strange, weird sometimes, even unsafe. We really need to remind ourselves that to explain these people what does it mean to be here as a colonizer. They are part of the oppressive system, and this is essential because this is the only way we keep the trust that we have. And it's done through a lot of teaching to Israelis and not to take anything for granted.
Okay, so we are concluding. Yeah, when it comes to indigenous people, no, I said already this. No, taking part in anti-colonial struggles, resources need to be diverted. That's what we would like to convey, with a particular sensibility to their power implication. This does not mean a redistribution in a pecuniary sense of the term, but rather a return to stolen resources. This requires an approach that engage with power management more broadly.
And the Sápmi collaborator summarized the essence of this approach. We never gave up our territories. Sápmi customary law and land management should have the final say on any initiatives in Sápmi. So we just want to leave you with like 2 questions that we are curious about as we try to think like together alongside these struggles. Thanks for listening. Thank you.
I forgot to ask that you hold questions to the end. We'll sit through all of these and then have discussion.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
So hello everyone. So going from that very fascinating presentation that really looking at power struggles on the ground, I am going to talk a little bit about my classroom. So up until yesterday, I was an academic. I just recently resigned after 15 years of teaching. So this experiment that I'm going to talk about today happened last semester in the spring of 2022. And that's the story that I want to share with you. Let's put it that way. So I've been teaching on decolonization now for a while. I've been training people. I've been doing a little bit of my own research in it, and I've studied it as well. But what always seems missing is how do you actually really decolonize? What does that process look like? And that's something that people always ask as the question at the end of it. How do we actually do it? And the truth of the matter is, I didn't know how you actually do it. I mean, we have a lot of ideas about what is colonization, what is decolonization, what should we be doing, how we should be thinking, but can we really do it? Can we really get to that point where we can all decolonize when our minds are so colonized? So that's the part that I used to always emphasize on, is that the process of colonization continues today. in the way our minds continue to be colonized. And the more and more we are colonized in our minds, the less we know how to actually go about decolonizing something. We think we know, but it's really very challenging. So this is what I was getting to with my students and really trying to think about what should we do about this. So in spring of 2022, I was going to teach a class on decolonizing knowledge, which is a class I've taught many times before. And so I thought, if we are talking about decolonizing knowledge, how about we actually set up the class to be decolonized as well? So really look at what the decolonized classroom could do for decolonizing knowledge. So really how we thought about, how we collect knowledge, how we disseminate knowledge, how we share knowledge with each other, all of those kinds of things as in the classroom, as the setting in which we actually try to make this happen. So what we did is we came together, all of us, and we decided to take certain steps, in terms of how we go about decolonizing the classroom. So I'll talk about that in a minute, but just to tell you the setup of the class, there were about 14 students. There was one student who was auditing the class. The rest were taking the class for grades. And on day one, I shared with them my thought, my perspective on how we could go about doing it, but also telling them, that they had a free reign. They could tell me what they want to do in terms of decolonizing the classroom. So everyone agreed, everyone wanted to do this. Everyone got very excited. It was seen as something that would empower everyone to take ownership for what we were going to do in the class. And that's how we began setting up this classroom structure. So then I'm going to tell you a little bit more about how we actually went about doing this. Okay, so the first one that we shared and we talked about is how education in itself has been a tool for colonizers, right? I mean, that's the single most contribution that colonization did or colonizers did for us, is capture our minds, right? And this is something that has been written about extensively. So it's about the mind that is first captured. So we talked extensively first about that, and really therefore how we came into this class. What did it mean in terms of what knowledge meant for each one of us? Where had been our sources of knowledge? So we shared with each other, where did we get our knowledge from? Where do we think, who contributed mainly to our knowledge? It's very interesting because people always say, well, I got it from my grandmother. I got it from, some elder in my family. We learned from other people. I learned because I was in this place, I was serving in this place in a Peace Corps, and I learned so much from the people. So I got my knowledge from different sources. And yet we tried to figure out which knowledge do we consider the most superior? Which is the knowledge that we really use in the classroom? Which is the one that we actually try to go and tell other people about, and how do we communicate that knowledge? And then there was some little bit of differences in how each one of us presented that. The next thing we did was talk about what are some of the characteristics of education. I'm going to go through all of them. And that one thing that we all said is that superiority, right? Something is more superior than the other. Some people are more superior than the other. That's one of the first teachings of colonization. And then that leads to the dehumanization of the rest. Just don't matter, really. It doesn't matter. Their thoughts, their knowledge, it always comes afterwards. Then we thought about the kinds of fear and deference we are taught as part of colonized education, right? And so these were kinds of steps we took to say we are not going to do all of this in the classroom, if you get my point. That's why we went through this detailed discussion. And we did it in the most practical way possible, not to start theorizing about it and not to have intellectual conversation, but really in very practical terms, we thought about these things. We talked about a capitalist ideology of growth. Education is about self-growth. It's about the knowledge I have, the knowledge, therefore I have become now superior to somebody else, and I can go to another place and I can teach people what to do, and all those kinds of things that emerged from that capitalist ideology. And then we talked about the reductive ways of how we approach this, where teachers and students have to learn to become obedient citizens. And this, we talked then about the education system. We talked about the broader education system in higher education, but then we talked about the education system that we were facing in our own school, right? I mean, the fact that we were being told that I have to lead this class, I have to report back with grades for each of the students, and then they get to evaluate me. So that was the system. That was the system in which we were going to try to do these things. So we made those kinds of stories, aligned them, tried to align all of those different types of stories. And then the final point over here that we had is decolonizing, which challenged the way we learned and we taught, so how we would learn and how we would teach change in this classroom. So we explored what that would look like. So first, let me tell you in terms of how we understand decolonization. So you see these different things over here where I wanted to move past the buzz. That was my primary goal. Everybody says decolonize this, decolonize that. People wear t-shirts, say decolonize, your food or something like that, where everything has become decolonized. So we wanted to move past that buzz. We wanted to talk, as I said before, about the praxis. We wanted to really get to practice. We wanted to stop intellectualizing decolonization and really get to think about what is to be done in practice. We thought of it as a process and not as an end point. So there's no such thing as, oh, we did it. We have decolonized today, so that we won't get there. It's like the process that we need to get there and what could we do about it. And then the final one was decentering. And this was very important to me because oftentimes decolonization is understood as replacing who's at the center, who has the power. And the assumption that if we replace it, we have decolonized, whereas we have just recolonized everything, right? We have just changed who's now in the center of it. So we wanted to challenge that, and we wanted to decenter in the sense of like saying, how many more people can we bring into this space of power, as opposed to just me being as the teacher in the space of power, and say how many more people could we pick. So that's the decentering portion. That's how we understood decolonization and went about it. So some of the key aspects of our process, and I think I will just do it like this. So one is we thought about developing policies jointly. So talking about policies like how do we grade, that was a big question mark, the number one question mark for students. What would grading happen, right? So we talked about that, how we would then set up ground rules. That was easier than the other one too, so grading was the most controversial. Like, first of all, should we even have grades? That was the whole point. But then how do you explain to the school that there will be no grades for this class? Should we have asked the class for a pass or fail? It was a huge detailed discussion around that. And then we thought about it and we said, well, everyone will come up with their own assignments, will come up with their own due dates. They will grade themselves, and I will just be like a sounding board. And I had a right to say that I don't think this is okay, but in the end, whatever they said would work. I'll come back to this later. But that's what we decided. That's the best we could come up with. That's the maximum our brains could stretch on that given day as we came up with this policy. And then we talked about course contract, as in just saying we have a contract, this is what each one of us will do. Here are responsibilities. Tell me if it's time 5 minutes. Okay. So you looked at it, so that's why. So anyway, course contract is again this idea of just our relationships, our roles, but it was also this idea is like how do we co-create a syllabus? Like what do we really do about it? That brings me to the next point that we had, which was really look at this pedagogy and curriculum. So how do we create a syllabus, right? And what do we do? How do we decide what the topics are? I'm not the one deciding anymore. I don't have to walk into this classroom with the syllabus for the whole semester. So what do we do? How do we do that? And then this whole thing about how we would go about running each class session. Like how would these remaining 13 classes that we had, how would we run them? And so again, the agreement was that one person would lead the class, or in pairs, they would lead a class. And that's again, the maximum our brains stretched. And we said that's what we would do. So I would teach the first couple of classes just to give them an intro to what decolonization is and make sure that conceptually we are on the same page. And then they would come and they would all be leading this class. So that's what we decided. Okay, what were the roadblocks? Here you see our roadblocks. I don't know if it's clear, right? With all this light over here. Sorry about that, but anyway. So one was this thing about challenges in decentering knowledge, people, and language. Okay, really struggled with this. So he said, Pushpa is not going to be in the center. She's not going to be teaching. Great. So I was sitting there in the background, but then there was another teacher every week. Somebody else was coming and standing there and doing what I do. They were telling us, here are the readings you must do for class, right? They gave us those readings before. Then when we came to class, they facilitated a conversation about those readings. So we were back to that idea that there is one person at the center of knowledge. It really turned out to be a flipped classroom is what we ended up doing. So the next thing we talked about, okay, what did we do in terms of decentering knowledge? All right, so everyone said, at least the first couple of people, they said, we're going to bring readings from Indigenous authors, right? And they presented that. That was decolonization? Not really. Yeah. So it was just that we had different authors that we were presenting, which was inclusive of us. We were becoming, more diverse set of readings. But diversity and inclusion, as we all know, is not decolonization in itself. So that raised a big question for us on what really does it mean to bring these different ideas into the classroom. We were all interpreting those Indigenous authors with our own colonized minds, because none of us really knew how to shift from our colonized minds to even interpret what we were reading, right? So that became a big issue. I'm cutting short some of these things, but I can go on. And the other thing is language that came up. Everything was English. Even though I was teaching in a school where languages was our biggest thing, and everybody had a second and a third language. And yet all of the readings were coming in English. And the argument was really, what do we do? I mean, otherwise you can't read. I mean, if somebody gave me a reading in French, I wouldn't be able to read it. So yeah, good point. So again, we all ended up with the same thing of reaching out only to English language, centering English language once again. So that became the next problem. And I must speed up by now. This whole idea of binary thinking, that I think you all referred to in the presentation, that we saw that very clearly as well. This or that. So get rid of this, bring this. No more white authors, some students said. And it was like, great, get rid of this, put this, and that's it. It's either this or that. It wasn't this idea of really how do we decenter or how do we make this bigger. It was the inability to be equitable. They weren't really necessarily just in terms of how they came up with the policies. We had a discussion around late submissions. So people set due dates, did not submit on time because nobody was there to remind them that your assignment is due. So everybody forgot. Not everybody, half the class forgot. And then they had to discuss the policy of late policies, which we completely forgot to do on day one. They were not able to be fair enough in that. They said, I did not submit late, so feel free, any policy is fine with me. Or late submission is totally fine if it's individual assignments, but not fine if it's group assignments. So if it affects me, no. If it doesn't affect me, do what you please, right? So I was like, how colonized is that? Isn't that how public policies get decided? If it doesn't affect me, all right, sorry, 5 minutes, yes. So that became a big thing. And then came up this thing that, we were definitely at different start times in the decolonization journey, right? And that was a big issue. Like really, we were not on the same page starting. Everybody was in a different stage. So how do you bring people into the same stage to do this decolonization journey successfully? It can't happen because everybody is progressing, but everybody's progressing from the stage that they were, and we were therefore not one together in that. So that became another thing, and that leads to it. So last slide, going to this. So dehumanization happens both ways. So when you think about decolonization and you think about replacing who has the power, who has the center, you're dehumanizing the person who's currently at it. Even though that they are most powerful, they're most privileged, and our goal really is to make sure that power is more equally distributed and all of that, you can't dehumanize them. So I'll give you the example that happened in class. I'm in the center, I was in the center, I said I would not be at the center, and then a student wrote, we did midterm, we had journals that we maintained, public journals, so that we could see what each one of us was feeling, thinking, we did all kinds of things. And one student wrote in the midterm evaluation that she pays tuition that pays my salary, and I was not pulling my weight in this class. Right? So here I was trying to make sure I bring more people in the center, but that's how it was. So it's kind of a dehumanization that happens both ways for us to be very particular. The decolonization doesn't end up doing exactly what colonization did, which is dehumanize people. So that was one of the lessons that we got out of that. And as peace educators, I think we have to teach people how to engage in conflict. So when they were not able to agree with each other, or when there was conflict, they didn't know how to handle that space. So I think That was one of the lessons I learned, is first start with teaching people how to engage in conflict, because decolonization, as Fanon says, has to be violent. There will be upheaval, there will be disorder. So people need to learn in the decolonization phase how to handle that disorder. Then we had this whole point around safe spaces and brave spaces. Again, the same point, that people will be uncomfortable, and people thought safe space is, I can never be uncomfortable. That's what a safe space means. And then getting to this point around fighting our colonized minds. I don't have an answer to how we go about doing that. Again, that's the practice part that I think we are lacking, is like, how do we step out of this colonized minds that we all have? And then the final thing, I think it's the final one, is like giving agency and taking responsibility. Everybody wants to have power. Everybody wants to have that privilege and says, we have been marginalized, we have been underprivileged. But if you do have privilege, you also have responsibilities. You also have things to socially respond if you are one of those people. If you're one of those people that's going to abuse others, different. But if you do want to come to the center, you really want to have that kind of power privilege, and you want to be socially just, you got to have that sense of social responsibility in these things. You can't just say, I want to be in the center, but hey, I won't make any decisions on late policy, or I won't do this, or I won't do that. Everybody needs to be involved in that. So that was one of the things. Oh, sorry. Just two more. So again, courage, compassion, solidarity for one another as we stand up and do this decolonization process was a big lesson learned. Now, each of these, it's like, how do we as peace educators, that's the part that I'm working on, is really like, how can you do each one of these in order to set people up on the decolonization journey? Because otherwise it's just a buzzword and nothing more.
Hello, everyone. Still, we can speak more. Before I talk about the theory or the political framework of capitalism, colonialism, neoliberalism, I would like to talk a little bit about my experience, because I am always saying practice and theory should be together. And I have my experience in Palestine. I'm always saying places shape who we are. Middle East created my identity and shaped my interests, especially research interests. I grew up in Palestine, Jordan Valley, in the 90s, exactly when the peace process started. And I am still one of the witnesses who were promised to live in peace in the Singapore of the Middle East. But unfortunately, we didn't see any peace, any tangible growth after many years of peace process and development process. During my time living in Palestine, I experienced the second armed intifada when Camp David talks collapsed between United States President Bill Clinton, Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, and Palestinian Authority Chairman Yasser Arafat. I remember that in the absence of peace and justice, my generation was unable to go to school years and years, months and months, 2002 and 2006, and reasons of so many things. Also, we struggled for years and years against instability, against fear, against occupation, against bad economic situation. Very early in life, my experience made salient to me that various imbalances between practice and theory, especially after we see many attempts from the international community who say, oh, let's just bridge the gaps between Palestine and Israel. At the same time, me and maybe my generation and so many people inside and outside Palestine were living the shocking realities, apartheid, neoliberalism, capitalism, and all of this stuff as a one package for the countries. Why I am talking about capitalism and political economy and neoliberalism, because all of these things made Palestinians completely consumers without development levers, made them depend on the political economy of the settler colonialism, which that adopted two main strategies: labor occupation, land occupation, two main elements for the production, and restricted social and political structure. So let's move to the point. I argue that neoliberalism, in light of fraud of donors and settler colonial policies, has led to the creation of distorted capitalism that relies entirely on rent, security, and relationship, distorted relationship of political power to economic elites. Methodology, I worked a little bit in the field in Palestine with CMI, Conflict Management Initiative, Conflict Management Initiative, and Masarat Center. Maybe Rahim knows Masarat Center. It's a think tank in Palestine. And that's why I am using inductive approach, because I was seeing different things on the ground. In addition to the constructive criticism approach, I am originally a civil engineer, so that's why I'm using this. In addition to different views and studies related to the same subject. The main objectives for my presentation, just to understand the relationship between neoliberalism and colonialism and a new type of or new or modern consumer models or types in the war zone. So this is just the main point from the presentation today. Of course, many people discuss this, and one of them, Rahim, is with us. And so many people that discuss this topic from one angle: is Israel and the whole situation apartheid or occupation or settler colonialism? But what's new, I started just last year when I saw different studies for Azmi Bshara, and he was saying that no, the context is three of them at the same time. It's settler colonialism, as you see the lands day after day, year after year, it's listed that. It's occupation, it's apartheid. So what this means in terms of crony capitalism. In general, crony capitalism, it's that kind of relationship between economy elites, between political power, between governments. Both of them, they agree that, okay, let's work together. We have common fruits. It's win-win. Okay. So you can get your interest and I can get my interest. So this kind of distorted relationship between political power, between economic elites, we can name it crony capitalism. But in Palestine, it's different a bit maybe because crony capitalism depends entirely on the political economy of settler colonialism. And this is something like different. We have crony capitalism in Palestine. It's not a reason why we live like this. It's a result because we have settler colonialism political economy. And we have three types. Tariq Dana in 2016, he said we have the three types of crony capitalists. The first one, returning capitalists that, like so many people in Palestine, after Nakba 1948, they went to God, they went to North America, South America, Europe, they started working, they get money, and that's why Yasser Arafat was saying we need Richmond, Palestinian Richmond, just to go out to Palestine to start building. So those people after 1993, they went back to Palestine to start their jobs. We have local capitalists. Anyone stayed after 1948 in Palestine, started doing his business, they started collecting money and they became capitalists. And the third one, which is much more important, post-Oslo's capitalists. This is because it's not natural. They were like designed from particular party to do a particular role in that land. Peace process, Palestinian capitalism, and new liberal area. Most likely all of us, we heard about peace building period, and they said it's peace process in addition to development process. And the donors were like very active in this process because they gathered in 1993 most likely, and to give the Palestinian people money to start their like a process development process. And I like this code. It's for Jared Kushner. He was saying that Palestinian people, the only people on this earth, like receive that amount of money without any development. And I will talk like more later on why. Israel received like more than 95, 98 billion dollars from the US government, and Palestine from the whole donors around 34, 35 billion dollars. But don't ask me where this money is. I don't know. So there's two schools in the Palestinian context. Some of them, they say under occupation, there's no development. It's impossible. Some of them, the ministry, I mean, the authority, in addition to the donors, they believe that we can do development, or we can do like small part of development under occupation. Is this true? I think my belief depends on so many data from so many resources. As an example, this is the trade balance. Until 2021, you can see the gap between them. The blue line, it's for imports. The yellow or orange line for exports. You can see how much the market, it depends on the products from outside, without any production, without any like process. It can like help a little bit Palestinian economy. At the same time, the employment rate. It's something, and I am pretty sure these numbers last 2 years. I don't believe that it's correct, because after COVID-19, so many like symptoms, they can't go to get the real number from the fields. And poverty rate. Third of the Palestinian people now live under poverty. So these indicators just like push me to talk like, is that a process with capitalists, with post-Oslo's capitalists, and like it was investment in peace and development, or investment in security? And I can argue easily it's investment in security. Why? Because we have 2007 as a benchmark before the new liberal policy started in Palestine, and we named it Fayyadiyya when Salam Fayyad, our former prime minister, was working in Palestine. Before 2007, the second intifada. Okay, before 2007, the second intifada started and the aid was cut off. After 2007, 90 donors, they gathered and they said, okay, we'll give you $7.4 billion because this is a new policies, a new development, a new type of development. I will skim like more slides because I want to go to my main slides in this presentation. And I want to mention that we have, if you want to understand this capitalism in Palestine, we have at the colonialism as a structure, not as an event. Why? Because if you see this picture, it's just an example for the IT sector. You can see how the state of Israel manage everything under, like the role of donors, PA role, in addition to the capitalist side, Palestinian that. These are our development plans after 2007, and all of them were, like, I think they came from international financial institutions as ad hoc development plans. I will go to the most important slide. So we have so many results. We have reshaping the social mindset after the development process and the role of capitalists. We have political apathy especially for the Palestinian youth, increase in lending. So many people, they went to banks to get money, and now they think only about economic concerns, not about political concerns. more individualism, and this is under accusation. It's something. It's not good. It's very bad because we don't think as a collective, as a people, they don't have as a collective like aim. More consumption. We have social control, and I want to go now to talk about the main slide in this presentation. Is there any practical example about this? I have two examples. Rawabi, it's like a modern city in Palestine, and Second Intifada and the status quo. My experience in this. Rawabi, it's a Palestinian cities located. If you see this orange circle, it's Ramallah. And this map for Rawabi, all of this, it's just area to be safe, to be consumer, to go to get your brands, Tommy, KFC, whatever do you want. Just think as there is nothing around you, no occupation and nothing. As a Palestinian, we used to live in this. It's maybe the quality it's not good. This is city. Also, this is village. I live in village. And we used to live in camps. Now, we have this. Look at this very carefully. And we have this. Can you tell me which one Palestinian area and which one Israeli area, which one settlement, which one Palestinian area? This one and this one. This one and this one. I can tell you that this is Rawabi, a new model of Palestinian city. The Palestinian city that mimics its colonial. Like this is from essay I was reading. That essay, it was written in 2021, and this is for the settler colonialism. It's settlement. So in this sense, I feel that like if we keep doing this, if the capitalism inside Palestine keep doing this years after years, we will our ID as an indigenous people. You know what I mean? Like the conflict, it will be between like two economic classes in Palestinian side and in Israeli side, not political fight, not political rights or whatever you like to name it, just you can use any words. So that's why I feel this subject is very important. And in addition, I need 1 minute, exactly. I experienced the second intifada. The second intifada, we studied at home, me and my grandparents, my father, my mother, around 2 weeks. We didn't need anything from outside. We have chicken, we have eggs, we have milk, we have food, we have vegetables in our yard, everything. But now, I don't want to swear, but I promise if we stuck 1 week, maybe we can go out to the street just to please all. We don't have anything. We are completely consumers. So many people, they left their lands. And I was talking maybe to Michael just days ago that even settler colonialism, economy, not just like this. Now lands, my father is a farmer. He couldn't find workers to work with him. So I was asking him, what do you want to do? He said, I'm going to leave the land in the Jordan Valley. That's meaning people occupation, occupation, labor occupation. This is the colonialism, neoliberalism, and our ad-hoc capitalism. Thank you.
So it seems like everyone's making sure that's the thing about this whole thing.
Okay.
Press the little eyeball. The eyeball shirt. It's like the most complicated possible.
Because they're crazy. They think that, the world is out to steal all of our data.
It's not your login into this. You can get your access to anything useful.
It won't, it won't. That's the part.
That's really the other thing that's gonna want. Just because I've done it.
Okay. Okay,
It was the shift.
that was probably. Yes. So I'll make every effort to be as draconian with myself as I was with the other presenters. So my title is Armageddon, it's been in effect. Dystopias, utopias, and utopias of the third kind. So this is a piece that comes from two places. One is a thought experiment that I've held for the last 2 spring semesters with my class, Building Community, Building Peace. And the second is a chapter that I'm writing for another volume on teaching peace through popular culture, edited by Laura Finley. So, subtitle, Public Enemy in Conversation with Ursula, Guin, Sarah Pinsker, and N.K. Jemisin. So I ask you for a moment to picture this. Chuck B and Flavor Flav invite Jemisin, Afrofuturist, McCarthy Fellow, Pinsker, lead singer in a rock band and science fiction writer, and Ursula Guin to a dinner party on Long Island. Professor Griff, Terminator X, and DJ Ward drop by for coffee and dessert. Political scientist, mystery and speculative fiction author, writer Walter Mosley, and physics professor and speculative fiction writer Adama Singh both crashed the party. What do they talk about? So as I said, thought experiment. The topic of our seminar is how to construct sustainable, just, intentional, peaceful communities in which hierarchies of human value and anthropocentrism become distant memories. Our context, we read The Republic, we read Aaron Manessa's Philosophy, we read Thoreau's Civil Disobedience and also Mosley's Utopia, and applied them to anarchist visions of horizontally organized, radically egalitarian pragmatism with a soupçon of idealism communities. So, conducted in this context, this is really a conversation between 3 stories. One is Ursula Guin's story of the ones who walk away from Omelas, variations on a theme by William James. Sarah Pinsker's The Ones Who Know Where They Are Going, and N.K. Jemisin's The Ones Who Stay and Fight. All 3 stories can be read as challenges to and subversions of literary homotopia, which is Vandana Singh's phrase, a vision of unified collectivity motivated by aggressive exclusion on some basis. And she notes that what usually unites literary utopias, they're exclusionary / reactionary or mimetic modernists, is a shared response to colonization, in which the colonizer is the unit of comparison. So first, little movie music. Warning, oh no, it didn't come through. Would you? Thank you. Yeah, it's the first cut, countdown to Amageddon. It won't be as beautifully loud as it would have been, but we'll get to that. And these are the lyrics. What? No, these are the lyrics. So thank you. So I play this for you because at a certain point in the pandemic, listening to It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back, I realized that when Professor Griff says Armageddon been in effect, that there's a deliberate choice of tense. We for Public Enemy, the Afrofuturists, the Atlantic slave trade, slavery is the point of Armageddon. For Vandana Singh, colonialism is the point of Armageddon. And at the time that I was thinking about this and writing this, the global pandemic was at least an apocalyptic moment in the sense that it was a revelation, a pulling back of the veil, so that we saw some realities of these United States of America that we would prefer not to think about. So I give you a little timeline. So we live in this post-apocalyptic future. This future is only an Armageddon effect. Now the Armageddon effect from the Africana studies perspective is the fact that the persistent effects of slavery are rendering contemporary conditions dystopic. We can talk about them also in terms of the persistent effects of colonialism. As you pointed out, colonialism is still going on. But just to focus for a moment on slavery, I think this is also true of colonialism. Slavery converted the human being from a subject to a monetary society. Slavery attempted to obliterate the ontological capacity of human subjectivity, that the human being, exceptional to all other species, is the unique entity, irreducible to exchange value. By its very nature, it attempts even to erase the memory of how human. So, if I could really thoughtful and efficient, I would have put 1619 up here. 1973 is the year that The Ones Who Walk Away from Omaha was published. And interestingly enough, while I consider it a dystopia, it is mostly read as a utopia, something that always puzzled me. Then in 1988, Countdown to Armageddon comes out on a 16-inch millions to hold us back. That was, by the way, going to be the original title of the album, but I just got other one that also. In 2017, a long stretch of time, Sarah Pinster publishes the ones who know where they are going, in Asimov's science fiction magazine. And then in 2019, Jemisin publishes The Ones Who Stay and how long till Black future. And Jemisin says specifically that she writes the story as a response to and a pastiche of the original Woodward story. Sadly, the ones who know where they're going is a very difficult text to find. Pinsker has not reprinted it in any of her short stories. I spent a month searching the internet to find the original Asimov science fiction issue in which it appears. So I want to talk principally about that little story. But by way of context, who here knows the ones who walk away from us? Well, a couple of people. So it's a first-person story narrative in which the speaker is telling us the story of this perfect city, all prosperous. It's on a day of celebration, and is continually interacting. Do you not believe this? Do you not accept this? And we'll add another piece and another piece. And the final piece is there is an open secret in all of us. There's a child kept alone in a basement, no human contact, dirty, uneducated. At a particular age, every single citizen of Omelas is taken down to see the child and to be told that the happiness and the prosperity of their city depends on this child, who periodically will cry out, I want my mama, please, I promise to be good. And goes on with the ways that people rationalize this. But the point of the story is there are always a small number of people, a few, who after they've seen it, go back to their homes, pack their things, and walk away. The person telling the story doesn't know where they're going, only knows that they won't stay. And Jemisin pretty much replicates the story in different, clearly post-nuclear apocalypse setting that runs parallel to Earth. And also centers on a child, but in different ways. You'll have to either read the story or read my chapter when it comes out to know about that. The ones who know where they're going, they also, Jemisin takes the same narrative. First person story, the person is telling us the story of this place. And occasionally challenging us to compare the city of which she is speaking to our own cities. Pinsker takes a really kind of radical departure to this, in that instead of a first person narrative, she provides us with a second person narrative. And so I will read you the first lines. You stare at the crack for a long time. It's a knife of light where there should be darkness. Light is the other thing. You remember that. It didn't used to hurt. Somebody has left the door unlocked. One of the people who pushes the food bowl into the tool room where they keep you, or one of the ones who come to stare. Unlocked and ajar. You never would have noticed if it weren't for that knife of light. You gave up trying to nod as ages go on. And so we learn from this narrator, remembering the day when the people came to take her away from her mother's complicity in allowing them to take her away. All of the times that she would cry out, she would attempt to speak, she doesn't really speak any longer. And as she considers this, she thinks, well, I can get out. I can run away. So she starts climbing the steps, and at each step, she remembers something. And about halfway up, she thinks, will the city crumble as soon as I leave the room or not? Others before me have died, and the city didn't crumble immediately. So there must be some space, some time in which to do that. She continues to go up and then thinks, but if I run away, they'll bring someone else. And decides that she won't leave. She goes back down the stairs, determined that she will live as long as she can, so that the next child, or the child who would have been the next child, will be spared her experience. Her last words: on the first stair, you choose again the thing you have chosen on every step down. You stand for a moment like a visitor, hand on the dented doorknob, but there is no child in you. You open the door and close it behind you. You would have liked to see the sky again. And it's a powerful story in that instead of being the people who are looking on, one of the problems I've always had with the ones who walk away from Omelas is, where's the agency? Why do people just pack up and walk away? Why don't they do something? Here, Pinsker gives us agency in the person of a child who's been kept in darkness for so long that the light hits, who's given up on crying or speaking, but who, as she attempts to make her escape, feels the sense of solidarity with the person who might follow her, and chooses again, and is suggested again and again to stay. So I'm going to conclude by saying that this is a work in progress, and I now have to add a new narrative. This summer, in Star Trek Strange New Worlds, I am a Star Trek groupie. I had an episode, Lift Us Where Suffering Can Reach. Watching with my husband, and I think, wait, that's Ursula Le Guin's story. They're retelling. In this context, it's sitting not in the clouds. They have technology. It is perfection. The Enterprise arrives just in time to rescue the ship that is bringing the first servant back to the planet, where he looks like he's about 8 or 9, will ascend to become literally the first servant. And they discover that what this means is this is a city that exists above a nightmare world of fire and lava. It can only exist because of this machine. The machine is so old, they don't know how it runs. All they know is that it requires a child. They insert the child into the machine until whatever the machine needs from the child is taken from the child, leaving a withered husk. And when the captain, like, this is not Captain Kirk, but his predecessor, discovers this, he is horrified. Because the woman he saved invites him to stay. And they can't, non-interference, they can't change things. They're not going to stay. But the point that they add to the story, to give us some hope, is another kind of agency. The space pirates, for lack of a better word, who are attacking the ship are actually former members of society who have decided that they are going to capture the next first servant and prevent him from being plugged into the machine. Ultimately, they convince the child's father to join them. And so even though this child ascends into the machine, there is this hope that sooner or later, the rebels will win and the city will fall. I'll stop there. And we have 15 minutes for discussion, questions, answers, smart remarks.